Good morning. First, our main story. An attempt by North Korea to launch a test missile has failed a day after it issued a nuclear warning to the US.
American officials believe a land-based ballistic missile exploded within seconds of takeoff close to the east coast city of Sinpo.
The test, which is in violation of UN resolutions, came just hours after a massive military parade was held in Pyongyang as a show of force.
Well, within the last half hour, the US Vice President Mike Pence has arrived in the South Korean capital for talks on the North's nuclear ambitions.
Our correspondent Steve Evans joins us from Seoul. Steve, any reaction there to this latest missile attempt from North Korea, and also what hopes for this visit from the Vice President from the United States, Mike Pence?
There's been a severe condemnation of the launch of the missile, or the attempted launch of the missile from South Korea. But in a way, it's kind of a template. We see this every time the missile is launched. And North Korea launches a lot of these missiles. What the thing does, the failure it does, is it puts that big parade into a kind of perspective. You saw those immense rows of fearsome missiles in Pyongyang being wheeled, being rolled past Kim Jong-un on Saturday, and then on Sunday they do what might have been a routine missile launch, and the thing's a damp squib. So it puts the whole thing into a perspective. Mike Pence has just landed here in South Korea. He's going to a national cemetery this afternoon on Sunday, and then on Monday it's proper business when he talks to political leaders. And he will emphasize that the US and South Korean alliance and the US and Japanese alliance is ironclad, will be the word I've got no doubt he'll use. But the bigger question is what to do about North Korea. We've had some extremely belligerent language from Washington, but then people in this region saying, well, hold on a minute, there are 25 million people within range of North Korean artillery. It's not quite as simple as that. The unknown element in all of this is President Trump. Will he do what his predecessors haven't done and say, I'm going to attack North Korean nuclear facilities, even though there's a risk of retaliation? That we don't know the answer to.
Steve, all the front pages of the newspapers over here this morning are talking about this as a very serious crisis, actually. How is it being regarded by people going about for their normal Sundays there in Seoul and in South Korea in general?
It's pretty normal here in Seoul. You know, there is this atmosphere, particularly in Washington, of we're on the brink of war. It's not the way it feels here. There isn't any panic buying. People are not working out how to get out of the city, for example. The government isn't giving any additional warnings. The US Embassy isn't telling US citizens to get out of town. The US Embassy here in the middle of Seoul is conducting business as usual. People in Seoul, people in South Korea are used to the kind of rhetoric that comes out of Pyongyang. And it's absolutely blood-curdling rhetoric about turning this city and turning Washington into a sea of flames. Having said all that, they're kind of used to it because they assume it's not going to happen. Because if North Korea attacked, the retaliation would be devastating and fatal for Kim Jong-un. But they are getting nearer having that nuclear warhead capable of being put on a missile. Today's failure indicates they're not there yet, but the route is marked out, and it is a step forward at a time with the odd stumble on the way.
Chocolate. He's around 6 foot tall, so plenty to go around.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's hope the weather stays nice and cool and Thomas doesn't start to sag a bit. It is 11 minutes past 8. Good morning if you've just joined us. You're watching Breakfast. And let's return to our top story. And the US Vice President Mike Pence, who has arrived in South Korea within the past half hour to discuss the North's nuclear ambitions.
Now, the visit comes just hours after Pyongyang tried but failed to launch a missile. Our correspondent John Sudworth is there. Now, his movements are being tightly controlled, but he's just sent this report.
It's almost certain that the missile test is meant as a message of defiance from the leadership here in Pyongyang. It came just a few hours before the visit to the South Korean capital Seoul by the US Vice President Mike Pence. And of course, just a day after North Korea held a massive military parade, a show of strength typical of this most totalitarian of states, and at which it unveiled what are believed to be its first intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's worth noting that in many regards this is business as usual for North Korea. It has long used brinkmanship and tension to up the ante and then win diplomatic and economic concessions as it steps back from the brink. But with each cycle moving one step closer towards its goal of becoming a fully fledged nuclear power. What's new in all this is not what's happening in this capital, but in Washington, of course. But it seems that North Korea's actions suggest that it is confident that President Donald Trump will, like his predecessors before him, eventually conclude that the cost of military action is simply too great. John Sudworth, BBC News, Pyongyang.
Let's talk a bit more about this with Scott Lucas. He's an international politics professor at the University of Birmingham. He joins us from our Birmingham newsroom this morning. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Let's pick up on that point, if you would, that John Sudworth just made there, that eventually Donald Trump might conclude, like Obama and those before, that military intervention is too big a risk to take. Do you think that's the case?
I'm not sure if Donald Trump himself is concluding that, but I think those who are driving the U.S. response, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, even Mike Pence, they probably have concluded that. In fact, I think throughout this sort of whipped up crisis over the last week, that this was where we were going to wind up. And that is the North Koreans were going to posture, as they have done this weekend, but in fact did not go as far as we thought they might, did not carry out a nuclear test. The Chinese would intervene, say everyone needs to calm down, and the U.S. would move towards diplomacy, towards any type of further show of force.
Is this part of a strategy, or is Donald Trump not a man for strategies?
No, Donald Trump's not a man for strategy. Donald Trump's a man for Twitter. But what's more importantly is that his agencies, those around him, I think are there to think through where they go with the next steps, at least the immediate next steps. They sent the carrier group out as a show of American force. The North Koreans beat their chest as we expect. But nobody expects that either side's going to push the button. Quite frankly, if the U.S. attacked, North Korea could strike back at South Korea with artillery, let alone missiles. They could hit Japan. They could destabilize the region. Conversely, if North Korea was to be as foolish as to launch anything at anyone in the region, that regime would be gone. There's no way that they could withstand the response.
As you mentioned, it's the people around Donald Trump, the organisations, the CIA, the Defence Department, whoever. Are they strong enough to control Donald Trump if he is as impetuous as perhaps some people think he is?
I think so. I mean, we have this idea of the president with the nuclear red button that can launch a strike at any minute. In fact, there's many layers in the American bureaucracy precisely to check someone who can be impetuous. And if you look, there's two key people that are here, both generals, both military men. James Mattis is the head of the Pentagon. H.R. McMaster is head of the National Security Council. They will have gone through all the options. They will have reviewed this very carefully. And there would have been very, very intense discussions quietly with the Chinese about how to de-escalate this.
We were talking earlier, about half an hour ago, to Sir Malcolm Rifkin, former Foreign Secretary. He alluded in one of his answers to the 1962-63, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is this similar?
No, 62-63 was extremely dangerous. We were on the verge of nuclear war. But remember, in the aftermath of that, to prevent that from occurring again, we had major changes in terms of developing, for example, the nuclear hotline, redeveloping American procedures in terms of how you escalate. We've been down this road with North Korea for several years. This is not new with Trump. It happened under the George Bush administration. We were here a year ago under the Obama administration when North Korea made threatening noises. Obama, much more level-headed, of course, quite easily contain that. But no, I think the danger is the more we talk up the idea that this is a Cuba, that this is like the possibility of doomsday, the more we feed into the possibility of an irrational leader seizing upon that to whip up his population.
And just one final one briefly, if I may.
Sure.
A president who came to power talking about America first, everyone thought that he was going to be very much more inward looking. We've since seen strikes on Syria, on Islamic State, the whole situation with North Korea. Is Donald Trump defying expectations, or will he ultimately turn around and start to look more domestically?
These aren't Donald Trump's choices. I mean, the decision to escalate with military strikes in Afghanistan with the biggest bomb, non-nuclear bomb ever, to escalate in Syria, that's the Pentagon, who are being aggressive in some areas while containing in others. I think Trump will posture, as he always does. The fact is, this administration is really on the defensive, and sooner or later it's going to have to turn to the economy and tax cuts and try to take the pressure off foreign policy.